Can you hear me okay? Good afternoon then.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here again in Prague. Since so many years, I'm coming to Prague each year. And in time, we presented a lot of interesting ideas that they came to life. And now I'm going to talk about Schematron for information architects. So in general, for XML, we have quite a large number of technologies that someone needs to learn, right? If we look at schema languages, we can immediately identify at least 5 that are defined as standard languages, right? So it's along with DTDs, we have XML schema, we have RelaxNG, we have Schematron, we have NVDL. All these are standards. There is also Schematron, I think, and maybe also some other initiatives for schema languages. We have also a number of processing languages for XML, like XSLT, XQuery, XPath, and so on. But there is no so much time. I mean, everyone has, it's always under pressure. You have 10 things to do. So when do you get time to actually learn all these technologies? And that's why I think it's very important to try to get people to actually know and start using a technology more easily rather than learning that from the start. At least not necessarily very technical people like many of us are here, but there may be people that are not that technical. So this presentation basically is an attempt to try to lower the entry barrier for people that try to work with Schematron, right? Because Schematron is a very nice technology. It's not that difficult, but because we are always under pressure and with 10 things to do at every moment, we just know about some technologies, let's say, but we do not get the actual time to actually learn and stay and use them. Before we go more into this, I just want to say a few words about business rules. Basically, business rules are some constraints that are not that generic to be part of a specification in general. And they are specific to either a project or an organization or of a specific use of. A few examples. For instance, it's, if you use images in your XML document, so you refer images, right? Some XML vocabularies, like data, for instance, has a scale attribute that you can use in XML to actually specify a different size of that image. The DTD or the schema allows you to do that, but for a specific use, you may say, well, in this project, we do not want to actually scale images dynamically, right? So we don't want to use this attribute. That's an example. Then you can, of course, some of these can be done also at the schema level, changing the DTDs, but others can be moved to an application layer, right? Another example is that making sure that list items do not end with a semicolon or restricting the length or the number of words in an element between some limits, for instance. If you have a short description, you may not want that 1,000 words, right? So I mentioned that when we try to enforce these business rules, it can be part of the validation process, or at the application up after the validation process, but we can also have a separate business layer, and that's usually implemented with the Schematron for XML. So now a few words about Schematron. As you've seen, it's one of the 5 standard for specifying as 5 standard XML schema languages. But it's different from the DTDs, XML schema, and RelaxNG, which are that specify more the structure of the document. So they are grammar-based, have a grammar-based approach, while Schematron has an approach on specifying different checks on those documents. Different patterns that are checked against the document structure or content. It was invented in 1999 by Rick Jelliff, and it's an ISO standard since 2006. Actually, it's a very, if you look at the different XML-based languages, it's quite in the most simple ones, so let's say. There are 25 elements in total, but actually 5 or 6 probably are the core ones. We have a number of Schematron implementations. The reference implementation is Skeleton, and most of the existing implementations, including the one from Jing, from the RelaxNG engine, which seems to be Java, is actually XSLT under the hood. So the idea is that you have the Schematron schema, you process that to an XSLT style sheet that compiles the rules from the schema, and then you apply that on the document and you get the validation results. Some of the use cases that I identified, especially for creating, authoring XML content, are for Schematron that it can be used to provide error messages that the users will actually understand compared to DTD errors or schema errors. Because you write those error messages when you identify a problem. In the Schematron schema, you put the error message. Before going any further, can I see some hands on how many of you actually know Schematron well? Okay. Then checking rules that cannot be enforced with a DTD or schema or even relaxing schema. Check for common mistakes, controlled values with the document function scheme. With the document function, we can basically bring in external data, call to a web service, call to a REST URL that will trigger an X query in an XML database and will give us some information that then we can use in those checks. Integrity checks across multiple files. I highlighted the style guide integration because that will be covered a little earlier, a little later. And the checks for targeting a specific deliverable. I was in a session where someone said that if you are writing for mobile device, you need to resize your application so the window will be will match more or less the size of a phone. So you see that when you write the topic your topic is too large or something like that. But you can do that maybe in a different way, not necessarily force you to write in that space. Now, the talk is called Schematron for Information Architects, and it's not necessarily a person, right? It's more a role, because one person can have this role and other roles. So it's not necessarily, it does not identify exclusively what someone will do, right? It's the idea that someone that identifies these business rules, these checks that needs to be performed, let's say on the information that is created. And this issues that you identify are usually documented in prose, for instance. You can document them in prose. Many projects have a README file where it says, don't do this, follow these best guides, and so on. Or they can be more evolved as part of a style guide that is published or made available somehow. Now, these persons may not necessarily know, may not necessarily be Schematron experts, right? So, but they know the project. They know what they need to create. They know the actual constraints. But they may not necessarily be XSLT or Schematron or XPath aware. So the challenge is, how can we make this? How can we make them be able to actually create Schematron checks, specify those business rules? Now we get to the simple use of Schematron, which basically takes advantage of a feature in Schematron called abstract patterns. Abstract patterns allow you to define a pattern and make that generic, allow you to define a pattern by providing some placeholders, like, let's say, parameters that then are specified from outside, so you can reuse the same pattern with different parameters, with different values for those placeholders. Here it is an example of an abstract pattern that it says restrict words. The name of this pattern is restrict words. So it's the idea, how can we restrict the number of words in an element, in a short description, right? So how can we restrict the short description to be between 3 and 50 words, let's say, right? And you can see here that in the rule context, instead of actually specifying short description or abstract or some element, we put a dollar parent element, which is a placeholder. And the actual value will be provided when we instantiate this generic rule, this abstract pattern. The same max words, min words. Max words, min words are also other parameters. So then, in order to use such an abstract pattern, we need to instantiate that pattern, right? So to instantiate the pattern, we refer to the pattern by name. We specify the name of the pattern that we want to instantiate, and we provide values for those parameters, for those placeholders. And then things became a lot easier. So in this example, if we want to use this generic rule, abstract pattern, restrict words, to say that we want the short description to be between 3 and 50 words, and we want the abstract element to be between 10 and 100 words, this is what we need to do, right? So now, if everything is a lot easier, and if we take this approach and we define a library containing a number of generic rules, implement these as abstract patterns, and then all we need to do is actually to instantiate those rules to actually create Schematron schemas. So then we can see that we get a split between different roles, basically. We can think of a Schematron developer role that will build the library of generic rules, abstract patterns, and he needs to know Schematron. We have the information architect role that will just instantiate those abstract patterns, and the only thing that he needs to know is actually the semantic of each rule, of each generic rule. So what's this rule for? What can I do with that rule? What parameters do I have for that rule? And the document writer, which will just, everything is transparent basically for him. He will be just notified of different problems, hints, and if some of you maybe attended also the oXygen meetup, maybe quick fixes, which are alternative actions that can be provided, Schematron quick fixes that can be provided, so the user will just choose one of the possible solutions rather than to follow the hint provided in the message. Yeah, so that's one idea, right? That if you follow this best practice and split the patterns into a library of generic rules and then just instantiate them, then it makes Schematron kind of accessible to non-technical people, because all they need to know is, I need to refer the pattern and param name value, that's all. So it probably takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes to teach someone to write this kind of thing. But then we can move one step further. I mentioned that these people tend to document things in a document, right? In a README file, or you may have a docbook file or a data set of files where you describe the rules that should be followed by your documents. And the question is, why would you have such a style guide? Well, if you let's say if you work in a team or on a larger project, and you identify one problem, what do you do? So you identify an issue in your documentation. What do you do next? So you identify in one file one problem. Do you try to see, if that problem is also present in some other place, right? So, and to do that, basically you kind of automate, you will run an XPath or a regex, you do something that will automate that search in a way. And let's say you fix that problem, but then you just forget about that and you leave it, so to appear again. So especially if you found that to be present in 50 other documents or 1,000 other documents, you probably want to document that. And that's the style guide basically, where you document those problems that you found, because you may not be with that company tomorrow or in 2 months, so the information needs to be there for someone to actually get access to that later on. So now if we have this simple use of Schematron where we have only instantiations of abstract patterns of generic rules, right? So all the information that we need is the name of the rule, and then setting values for parameters, right? So if this is the only information that we need, we can encode that information also in the style guide document in some form, right? If we have, for instance, a style guide in data, we can encode this, for instance, as an example. It can be, you can choose whatever encoding you want. You can specialize and have your own element. But in this example, for instance, I decided to use a data list in data. And then the data description head will be the pattern name, right? So restrict words. And the parameters will be specified as a data list entry, with the term being the pattern name and the data description being the value of the pattern. So parent element, which is the parameter name. See, the parent element parameter name is the data term, and the shortest is the data description, right? So basically it's the same information, the name and the parameters and values, but encoded in a different form, in a data list in data. Why I would like to do that? Because there's also an idea here that we can also have this C attribute in Schematron that can point back to the style guide on that phase. Right? So why I would like to do that? Because basically if we put the information within the style guide itself, then we single source the pros and the check that enforces that what the style guide says. Right? So if in my style guide I describe that the short description should be between this limit and that limit, I can put in the same place an encoding of the business rule and then generate from that the actual Schematron schema. Right? So all this is implemented in this DIM project, which is available on GitHub under oxygenxml.com/DIM. It's an it stands for Dynamic Information Model. It was initiated by me and Frank Miller from Comtech Services. And then we have contribution also from Alex, my colleague Alex, and Octavian and Nico. So Octavian and Nico did the quick fixes contributions, and Alex did some of the graphical user interface part, and Don Stevens from Comtech provided a style guide as an example style guide. So it has an Apache 2.0 license, and it's available on GitHub. So basically what's inside, it's a style guide, a library of rules, scripts to generate from the style guide Schematron rules, and also we provided a graphical user interface to easily create rules visually in the style guide. So let me quickly show you how that works. So this is the Schematron with the generating the rules. Here you can see all the available rules from the library are imported, and then we just have, instantiations of those rules. So that's what's generated from the style guide. The style guide itself is a data document, a data map with different topics. And within those topics, so if I have the topic about short descriptions, you see here that one of the phrases, so this is actually a sample of a style guide provided by Comtech Services. It's something that they sell to their clients, basically, that they provide to their clients, but they have only pros, right? And if they want to enforce that, they can use Schematron, but it needs to be developed outside, right? So what we can do now is basically we can press an action, and then we see the available rules from the library. We have the description of those rules, the parameters, and so on. And this already contains a number of rules here. And if we look at the source code for this, it's exactly as you've seen, a data list with the name of the rule and then the parameters and the values. But in the user interface, it's a lot easier to actually set those parameters. I have here an example topic that can be refers to the rules Schematron, and I just want to show you an example. Let's say on this image, we scale this, as I said, to be larger, so twice the size of that image. Right, so right now I do not have any error. I scale that, it's okay. I will discover that in 2 months when we publish and there will be a problem. But if we go to a topic that talks about, from the style guide, let's say that talks about the scale attribute, and this says there's no values, there should not be used, right? So there's no value available for that. If I knew the style guide, probably I should not done that, I should not have scaled the attribute. Now, if we use this action, then we can say avoid attribute in element. It's one of the generic rules available in the library. And it says I have 3 parameters. One is the element, and the other the attribute that you don't want to be present on that element. And then a message, which is the error message that you want to send to the user. Right? So if I select this, then I can just say here image, the attribute scale. Please do not scale images dynamically, and so on, so on. Use an external tool to actually set the actual size of that image that you want. So once we do this, we have an XSLT script that generates the rules STH. So now here we see the avoid attribute in element pattern that is generated. It also has this C attribute pointing to the style guide topic where we have information about the scale attribute and the message that will be sent to the user. If we go back here, we see, the error message, please do not scale images dynamically, and so on. So exactly what we put there. And you notice also the prefix that we discussed about, and one, it says here the attribute scale will be deleted, right? So instead of going manually and deleting that, I also have a prefix that says, delete that attribute. And that's specified also as part of the, so if we follow this, this rule, we can see that we have a prefix avoid attribute in element delete with a name, and that prefix is defined in the prefixes that says SQF delete with that attribute, basically. So there's a way, basically, with the SQF language, and I will have a link at the end where you can read more about that, to not only identify issues in Schematron, but also define a number of actions to fix automatically those issues. Let's go back to this for a while. And, if this is the C part translates into this URL that you can click, and then you get a browser exactly to that topic where you have information about the problem that was identified. Okay, so I kind of went through all these steps, so you've seen, basically an information architecture. Just click on that and set rules on the topic that makes sense for what they have there. Now, I think the main idea is that we can make Schematron really usable if we use this best practices idea of separating rules, generic rules, as abstract patterns in the library and just instantiate them. Even if you stop at that point, it's very easy, because all they have to know is use the pattern element, point to the abstract rule and then specify with the param element the name and the value for the available parameters. So that's a big step already. But then we can also single source within a style guide the pros and the rules that enforce that, right? So that's a step forward. And similar user interfaces can be provided in any XML authoring environment. It's not something that, it's probably 1 or 2 hours of work in any such tool to provide a nicer user interface to create this, those fragments within the style guide. And also the XSLT is one page that extracts that and generates the rules file. So it's nothing complicated, and you can define your other encoding if you want within a docbook document or so on. As future work, I think we can think about, instead of extracting the rules, we can point directly to the style guide itself and include that either in the pre-processing, like we have Schematron embedded rules within XML schema or RelaxNG. So we can kind of point to a data map, for instance, and then automatically have the Schematron validation based by extracting the rules directly. We need to define more rules and integrate quick fixes, but you already seen that Nico and Alex already provide that functionality with quick fixes support. Here we have some links on, again, for the DIM project, for the Schematron specification, and for the Schematron quick fixes project. And thank you.
Thank you, George. So, any comments or questions? We have a few minutes. Yeah.
Have you considered providing a style guide for XSLT programming using this technology?
It would be interesting. No, I haven't. I mean, in general, I see developers very high level, and the technical authors, more. I think they need more help, right? But what we've done for XSLT was improving using also this information available on Saxonica, improving the tooltip information that we provide when they try to use a function or use an element. So we try to provide that information.
But you could, for example, have a house style guide that says every variable must have an as attribute and enforce it this way.
That would be very interesting, yeah. And it's nothing that, stops us from doing this kind of thing, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, it's very nice the way you've integrated that with data and quick fixes. But I wanted to testify on the fact that abstract patterns are really very useful for this kind of thing. A while ago, I had a customer who came to me asking if I was available for 3 months to write guide rules in the book while like this. As a Schematron schema. So I could have made a lot of money, but I started to read the book and I was not able to understand what was in the book. So I said to them, we're going to do something different. And what we've done is that we've written some, I think around 20 abstract rules for Schematron, and they've been able to use them to code all what was in the guideline. So it's really, it does work in real world, and it's really the way to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, George. A very interesting approach that you presented. And we did some research on the same problem space, and we ended up with a very similar solution with instantiating abstract patterns to make it easier for authors not that deeply in that technology to build some rules. But in one aspect, we had a different solution that we introduce a separate layer because we found as well that it's not satisfying that you have a technical implementation of the validation, like Schematron or a schema, and then you have prose, which actually specifies in a human-readable form what rules has to be respected. So we did not bind the implementation to the style guide or the specification, but had a separate layer where we define the rules in another XML files, which is completely independent how you implement it. So it's independent how you implement it, if you implement it in Schematron or Schema or so on. So, and then we refer from the Schematron to this machine-readable rules documentation, which is not sought for humans, but for machines to read and have this direction.
I also was thinking about, that because this helps the quality of the documentation, and there are tools like acrolinks that check the language. So nothing stops you basically to embed also something in the style guide that will be translated to a configuration file for that tool. So it's not necessarily linked to the Schematron technology. The idea can be reused also for other things. But I like the fact that the rule stays within the style guide itself, because if I change something, I can see the rule right there and, see, maybe I should change also this rule. Because how the rule is encoded, it doesn't necessarily, is not dependent on Schematron also. It's just the name and some parameters, right? So the implementation can be different.
Okay, last question, I think there was, yeah, okay. Over there. So bring the mic.
We're in time, right?
So I think it's a very good effort because the information is in one place, but I think it's also trying to solve the intractable problem of programming by non-programmers, because essentially you're letting non-technical people define the rules, and if you need to develop more complex rules, they will eventually need to learn XPath too anyway, I suppose.
Or ask, there are these different roles. So basically, if you are an information architect and you want to define a rule, and you don't find that in the library, you don't find anything that matches what you actually need, you send a request to the Schematron developer explaining what you need, and they will create a new generic rule that will be available to you. So that's how I think this should evolve, basically, in an interactive way where when there's no rule, there will be an issue, and when that issue will be solved, the rule will be available and to everyone, basically.
Thank you. Thank you, George.
Thank you.